Jackson, of course, is the rule of law, and quoted in many spoons, and he's often a bipartisan sort of a hero, even though he was a registered Democrat in many fronts. But law is important to him. And I know that recently you've paused to think about justice and your own self, and looking kind of introspectively in some things that have happened in your career. And we're going to harken back, I guess, to your days at pre-high school days and in this Catholic school system and the Catholic schools. You want to talk a little bit, you are Catholic, and talk a little bit about kind of that world.
And I will. Actually, I want to get something.
Sure.
I was an altar boy at St. John's Roman Catholic Church. I think the church opened in 1961. Well, I know that. And I became an altar boy in 1962. I was very young. I was 9 years old. It wasn't a full-fledged altar boy. I was called an observer. And then you became an altar boy. And so all the altar boys, it was a close group, and we would be honored sometimes to be invited to camps and weekend retreats with some of the priests. And that's when something happened that was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. It was abused by a priest, which happened, and I went through the legal process, but not until 50 years later. And Diocese of Buffalo opened up the window when you could file a complaint, which I did. And it had enough substance, even though the activities occurred in 1967 to 1970. And when I had to meet with these jurists, 3 retired justices, either the New York State Court of Appeals or New York State Supreme Court, I don't remember, very distinguished. And I had written a statement, and we should stop, right? Okay. Oh, it was a test because the guy came in. Yeah. Okay. I'll continue.
Yep.
I had submitted a statement, and the guy who was the chairman of the panel said, "Are you Brett Kavanaugh, that you remember things from high school? Do you have calendars?" And I said, "Your Honor, I don't have calendars, but I have this watch. This is my confirmation watch, and on the back is engraved the date of my confirmation, which is April 30th, 1967. And I got confirmed on April 30th, 1967, and here's the watch. But the night before, I had been abused by a priest. So I remember the date pretty clearly because it's engraved in my watch, which I continue to carry with me everywhere I go. So I finally got the courage to do that legal proceeding. And not only did I get a settlement, which wasn't the point, but the Bishop of Buffalo called me and apologized. And that meant a lot. And the perpetrator was not actually really happy the way they dealt with him. But other people have since filed complaints about this person. I'm not sure I should say his name.
You can say it. It's obviously you got final say on all this.
Right. So when you're in a small town, these things happen. And I was the altar boy at St. John's, and we had a young associate priest. His name was Father Louis Mako. And he was from Hungary. And so he was new to America. So my family took a real shine to him, and he would come to our home and have dinner. And then after these molestation events occurred, he would still come to my house and have dinner. And I could never tell my parents. To this day, my parents died, I never told them, because they would not have believed me. Why are you saying this? You're making this up. And I've noted in Jamestown in the papers when other priests are accused of similar wrongdoings, the reaction is, no, that did not happen. Well, unless you were there, you can't say it didn't happen. So for me, it was very difficult to have this person in my house having dinner when things happened that shouldn't have happened. I never could tell anybody until I got to Cornell. And I felt like I was in a safe environment, away from Jamestown, away from the church, away from my family. And I went and talked to a counselor. And I started crying. It was like, it was amazing. That was in 1973. But from 73 till 2020, when I got my settlement, I always wanted to track this guy down. And I did. And that's, I guess, the basis of the rule of law.
So you did track him down.
I did.
Was there a meeting?
No. The hearing was to establish substantial evidence that he had done this, and then 6 other people filed complaints about him. And sadly, he's back in Hungary, so he's no longer under the jurisdiction of the courts in this country. And then things happened too quickly. The bishop called to apologize, and then he resigned. The Diocese of Buffalo went bankrupt. So lots of things happened, and it was, I had a little bit of credibility because I've done work for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And quite frankly, I think that's one reason they permitted me to have a hearing, because the Bishop of Los Angeles called and said, you got to listen to this guy. But to my knowledge, he's still in a retirement home, and I think he's 83 years old. But he got called to task by the bishop for what happened, and I don't know what his reaction was.
If he walked in the room now, sat at the chair I'm in now, what would you say to him?
I would say, how could you have done that to someone as vulnerable as I was? I was 14, but there were younger boys. They're still in Jamestown. And, you know, my therapist says you can't call somebody after 50 years and say, hey, let's talk about what happened in Mayville, New York, in that trailer in 1967. You just can't. You don't have the right to interfere in someone's life. But I would ask him what gave him the right to, this was not consensual, this was, and priests were elevated on a higher level, so it was, I would want to know what motivated him. It's fine to, no, it's not fine. It's just, you should never cause pain to a child. In Catholic healthcare, we have a phrase, the purpose of Catholic healthcare is to provide care for everyone, especially the poor and vulnerable. And the poor and vulnerable are defined as children and people who need health care who don't have resources. So I just don't understand how someone could do that to someone 14.
Did you get a sense that you were singled out, or was this did you get just a sense, I suspect, that other of your parish was equally abused? Other
altar boys were abused. I mean, I was at the home when I knew it was happening, at the home in the country. And that's another thing that I find troubling. These vacation homes were owned by pastors. So I don't know. If I was a pastor of a parish and the assistant said, I'm bringing 8 altar boys for the weekend, I guess I would say, just like to my son, you can't bring 8 kids for a sleepover. We don't have 8 bedrooms. How are you going to sleep? How are you going to do this? And I guess I wonder why the pastors didn't do a little more deep dive, and that's why I think that they were culpable also.
So you have lived with this forever. I mean, that's the obvious, but was there an aha moment to describe, to say, I really do want to go somewhat public here? In the last year or two, I still read the Post-Journal online, and in the last 2 years, I think, there were allegations made against priests in Jamestown. Father Federico, who was the pastor of St. John's, and I think it's Father Attia from St. James. And when I read about those and saw the reaction that how dare anybody make these allegations, these guys are dead, it's not true. That's when I wanted to go public. And I sought counsel from
friends and from other people. And how do you go public? I don't know. So I didn't ever do anything. I thought about writing a letter to the editor. I thought about, but it's a very difficult topic to talk about. And it's not like you want to stand up on the mountaintop and say, hey, this happened to me. That I've never participated in a lot of judicial proceedings, but having to appear before 3 justices, I wish I could remember what courts they were, but very distinguished, very senior. And I'd done a little homework. One of them had a JD from Cornell, which I thought was kind of nice. But still, it's just very, tell us exactly what happened. You don't really want to tell a stranger what happened. So it's not something I've ever felt totally comfortable. This is the first venue where I've talked about this in some sort of setting that's not private.
Have you talked to the family?
Only to my brother. I could never talk to my parents about it. I just think it would crush them. My parents are both gone. I've talked to family members who don't live in Jamestown. Cousins, I have a cousin who's a dentist, another one who's a social worker. I've talked to them about it, but I've never talked to anybody. I don't have that many cousins left. I think I have 1 in Jamestown, 2, and have not talked to them about it.
What about your son?
I have talked to my son about it. One thing that I should mention is, although I was married for 25 years, I figured out later in life that I was gay. And when you're gay and a lot of people don't know you're gay, you develop a comfort level in telling people. So my son was 16. His mother is much smarter than I am. She's a Harvard PhD, a psychologist. And we had decided that it was never going to be a good time to tell him until he was 16, 17, out of puberty, ready to go to college. So we wrote the speech. My wife had written the speech. Took him out to dinner, and I'm saying, so Sam, and I would name people who were gay. I said, I'm Uncle Tony, my brother. He said, oh, I love Uncle Tony. I said, Uncle Tony's gay. And he said, yeah, I know that. I said, my friend Jim? Jim, do you know that Jim's gay? He said, yeah, I knew that. He said, Dad, if you're trying to tell me that you're gay, I've known for years, and I love you. And he gave me a hug. And I almost burst into tears, because when you tell a child that, you're worried that they're going to hate you.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, you're not my dad. And I remember that, Dad, I've known for years, and I love you. So that was pretty cool. So when I did the settlement and had to do the hearing, I talked to him, I talked to Ellen, and they're in the know, obviously.
Yeah. How do you, have people come to you, would they come to you, do you think, to seek counseling? So, for example, and I'm not suggesting you will or should, but should this go somewhat public, this interview that you and I are having, and they call you and say, I too, but I've never talked about it. How would you counsel them?
So I'm the chairman of my undergraduate fraternity at Cornell, the chairman of the foundation, and I have come public there, which is unusual because fraternities rah-rah, macho. I've had 2 or 3 classmates who have sought me out because they too are gay, and there's one person I haven't succeeded yet. He has never told anybody except his boyfriend. So I'm still, it's a work in progress with him. But if some of these young men who I know who they are, I know their names, I know where they live, if they came to me, I would welcome the opportunity to get them the benefit of my experience, what a relief it was to get some sort of satisfaction that the rule of law and that justice prevails. I have a saying that the good guys always win. And I would encourage them first to get some counseling. And secondly, I think the window is closed for filing claims. I may be wrong on that. But I would encourage them to pursue some sort of remedy. Not for the compensation. The money I got, I gave away. I gave a lot of it to the Jackson Center. But you do need to close that wound. and the best way to do it is to address it. So I would hope that they would approach me.
As you're here today, we talked in advance that you were willing to do this. What's a question I should be asking you concerning this experience that I haven't?
I guess I would say that you should say, how could this happen in a small town like Jamestown, New York, where the teachers were so empathetic, the counselors were so good? How come no one got you to talk about this when you're 14? When something like this happens when you're 14, I guess I would have been either in 9th grade or in 10th grade, maybe 9th grade. I was very close to the counselor. All of a sudden, I'm depressed, I'm sullen. My grades didn't suffer, fortunately, but I would have thought that somebody would have been able to probe a little bit. I resigned as an altar boy. I quit, and the pastor didn't call me and say, hey, you were one of our prize altar boys. So I guess I'm curious that nobody ever asked me what was wrong. I'm not sure I can blame them. I should have had the courage to tell them. But it's not an easy thing to tell somebody when you're 14.
In hindsight, and that's always 20/20, do you suspect that the other parish priests that were part of that network here in St. James, St. Peter and Paul, St. John's, knew this was going on then? Or was
Oh,
it
I don't
singular?
suspect it. I'm positive they knew. The homes that we went to, this didn't happen in the rectory. Actually, once it happened in the rectory. Yeah. But it generally was at Father Federico had a trailer cabin in Mayville, and there was another priest, I can't remember his name, but he had a cabin in either Angelica or Hornell, and the pastor at Angelica moved to St. John's as the pastor. So, if you have a cabin on Chautauqua Lake, you know that you have a cabin on Chautauqua Lake. So if you have a cabin in the woods and your associate pastor is bringing altar boys there for the weekend, I think they knew what was going on. I really do.
Is it now, again, hindsight, surprising that during that time period where you were not the only one abused of that group, and yet here we are, 2021, and it really was well-kept, secret, internalized. Do you get to think what damage that may have done to all these other folks?
I'm sure it caused damage. I'm not close enough to them today to know if they had failed marriages or if they suffered depression. I think I was pretty resilient. I took action. I resigned as an altar boy, and then later on I was a lector at church, and I was on the parish council, and I resigned both those positions also. So I tried to cut my ties with the church, and how ironic that now I'm working for the Archdiocese in Los Angeles, which itself has had hundreds of millions of dollars of settlements. I think in my case this made me more empathetic to victims and to helping people recover. Some of my work in philanthropy has been to open clinics and resource centers, but I don't know. I have to assume that those people had some issues in their lives.
Going forward is, it seems like you probably mentally crossed a barrier here in the last couple of years in resolving not only the public part of your life, just let them know about your abuse, but also the settlement. I know that's not of consequence, but it's just a release, and now it's paperwork done. Is there an ongoing message that you would like to give to somebody if somebody came to you?
So there are these institutional issues that take place. I contacted the people in Buffalo. There's a survivors organization. But I'm not in Buffalo. And Los Angeles has its own set of issues, and there were thousands of people abused. So I initially thought about getting involved in one of those organizations, but I've chosen not to. I think for me it's more personal, and if I find out about something, or if someone seeks my counsel, like my fraternity brother, I think I'm an empathetic listener without becoming an activist in the world.
This may pry deeper than you want me to pry, but was this a singular event, or did the priest find that having once done, it's now kind of fair game?
Yeah, it wasn't a singular event,
Yeah.
and it continued
Okay.
from 67 to 69 or 1970. And it's interesting because my son's 27 now, but when he was in high school, I found out that he was sexually active. And you're never quite sure what to do in a case like that. And he was 16 or 17. And so I sought counsel from the school and from my wife. And you take action. I talked to him about it, and we educated him on birth control. And then I called the father of the girl. And I'm glad I did, actually. And he said, "What's this about?" I said, "Well, I don't want to be a grandfather. Do you?" And so he then dropped everything. We went and had coffee, and he was able to get her to see a gynecologist and put her on the pill. These things happen today, and I think I'm much more, I don't know if the word's empathetic, much more willing to address a topic like that, like a 16-year-old having sex. I remember talking to the headmaster of the school. I was on the board of the school, for God's sakes, and he said 90% of our kids are sexually active. I said, "What do you do about it? There's no sexual class. There's no Planned Parenthood seminars. I think you're dropping the ball." Yeah. And I'll tell you one other thing that I did, and I'm proud of it. Again, it goes back to my son. My son was a very good athlete and was captain of the soccer team at his high school, LaSalle High School in Pasadena. And he said, "Dad, one of the teachers always comes in the locker room and after a game, and we're taking showers, and it's just weird." And I said, "Has he touched anybody?" He said, No. He wouldn't, because we're jocks, but it's just weird that he comes in the locker room. So I sought it upon myself to go visit with his teacher, and I didn't bring up that, but when you've been abused, you have good radar. And I sensed that this guy was doing some things. And then this guy, who was a teacher, came to speak to a board meeting. And little things, there were students, not my son, but other students, and a couple faculty members, and he went up and he put his arms around, this is before Me Too. This is in the, I don't know, my son graduated from high school in 2012, so it's probably 2011, 10 years ago. Put his arms around these boys, and I could see. So I made an appointment with the president the next day. I said, I think you have a potential molester on your staff. He said, "What do you mean?" Always defensive. And I hadn't gone through the pursuing the legal remedies yet. But I learned that you got to bring these things up. And they did an investigation, and guess what? They fired him. But guess what? They didn't fire him. They fired him from that school and then moved him to another school. And he was a priest, by the way. So this stuff still happens, and people don't know how to respond. Because it's not supposed to happen. A teacher's not supposed to go in and violate a sacred trust. So I think I realize I'm maybe not being totally responsive to the question, but it's, even though this happened before, I think after I talked to my son about what happened and about being gay, it's made me more empathetic, more sensitive to the wrongs that happen in the world. And when something like that happens, it can really destroy, suicides result. People can't cope. luckily I was strong enough that none of that happened. But it's made me a better, more vigilant to see things that might happen like that.
Have you been back to your church? You come back to Jamestown periodically? Is it hard to darken the door?
It is. I had to go there for the, actually, this is a funny story. I went, both parents died, and so we had funerals. And in both cases, I wanted to have songs. There was a Willie Nelson song that my mother loved, and I can't remember what the song was that my father loved. So I went and talked to the organist, and this is, again, pre-settlement with the diocese, but you learn how to challenge things. So I went to the organist and said, I want you to play, and I had the music. And she said, well, I have to check with Father. I said, why? He said, well, because he doesn't like Willie Nelson songs or whatever it was. Stardust was the song. And I said, I'll take care of Father. And so she played the music. And then afterwards he came to yell at me. I said, you know, it's my funeral. It's my dad's funeral, my mom's funeral. You can't select the music.
Yeah.
And so I have not gone to worship at that church in 30 or 40 years. But the two experiences were both with the funerals and both kind of negative. No, the funerals were lovely.
Yeah.
The negativeness of the priest dictating that you can't play a certain music. We're not talking about rap music. It was lovely music.
Yeah. This has been great, Joe. I just feel like, is there something else that anything else you would like to kind of, as you're talking to an audience, if we went live and said, I want to look in the camera now for a second and say something?
You know, I would say that although I didn't come back here and make my career here, I feel like the values of a small town, not the priest, but the values of the small town of friendship and openness and candor, and just growing up in a small town and then moving to a big city has been a great experience for me. I can't imagine. We wanted our son, who grew up in Los Angeles, to come back to a small town to go to college. So he got into Hamilton and Hobart and Ithaca College. He didn't have the grades for Cornell. All these schools in upstate New York, and he said, Dad, what would I do here? Like, is there a professional basketball team? I like the Lakers game. So I think it's hard to move from a big city to a small town with the values of sort of more sophistication and more things to do. Whereas the opposite, you know, Ralph Erickson moved from Jamestown, New York, he was Deputy Attorney General of the United States and then big-time partner in a law firm in Los Angeles. Ralph Erickson, Robert H. Jackson. You learn those values in the small town, and then you can apply them on a bigger stage. So I think that's a message to Jamestown, to be proud of the town, and I'm proud that I grew up here.